Welcome to the Parable Arrows podcast, where we wrestle with story to seek deeper truth. We believe that engaging with the art of the world can help us discern more of what God, as the true artist, is trying to reveal in the beauty of his story. Join us as we discuss movies, ideas, and practice engaging with art, God's word, our thoughts, and each other.
Hey Archers, this is the Parable Arrows podcast. I am one of your hosts. This week, this is Josh. I'm joined by none other than Mr. Femi Shikoya. Femi, what's up, my guy? How you been?
All right, man. It's good. We're at the beginning of June 2024.
Yep.
Things are going okay,
Yeah.
I could go into many, many details, but then that would be a whole other podcast.
Yeah. So this episode is going to be about the film Hook, starring Robin Williams. And we chose this film mainly to celebrate Father's Day. So our last episode was Brave, kind of celebrating, mothers and looking at the dynamic between Merida and her mom and stuff like that. So we're going to be looking at Hook from a similar lens to celebrate dads. So I know, Femi, you kind of had the main inspiration for this film. So what were some things that you wanted to maybe shout out or point to about why we chose Hook this time?
Yeah, so one, I want to just say thanks to all of our listeners because for me in this season of life, I'm not getting to the movie theater as fast as I would like to for new movies. So picking movies that are things to rethink or to reconsider with a group or inspire a group to reconsider as part of selecting these movies based off of the holidays that are nearby. And yeah, Father's Day is coming up in June. And Hook is a movie that I remember just being fascinated by when I was a kid, but it really focuses on Peter Pan as a father figure and the changes in the character. One thing that's really cool to do if you take any story is to look at what happened before the story started that you saw or after the story, then you finish that book and imagine. And this sort of takes that imagination piece. And that is something that I hope that all of our fellow archers do in their imagination and discussion with friends and family. So that's why we wanted to pick a movie that you might go, I have never heard of this movie, or it's so old, or why this? Partially connected to the day, partially connected because Josh is gracious with my season of life, and also because we think it's a really good practice. So that's why we selected this one this time.
Yeah. So just like always, we're going to be attacking this movie using our SMART breakdowns. So that is S for summary, M for message, A for audience, R for rethink, and T for the end for theology. So without further ado, let's jump into the summary. All right, so this summary is coming to you via fandom.com with a little bit of AI magic in there to kind of condense it down, save us some time. So Hook is about Peter Banning, a successful lawyer and family man who struggles to balance his career with his roles as husband and father to Jack and Maggie. Despite his promises, Peter's work commitments often overshadow his family's important moments, straining his relationships. During a visit to London to honor Wendy Darling, Peter's neglectfulness reaches a breaking point when his children go missing, leading to a shocking revelation. Peter is actually the legendary Peter Pan, and his old nemesis, Captain Hook, is back, and he has kidnapped his kids. Guided by Tinkerbell, Peter rediscovers his lost memories and returns to Neverland to rescue his children. In Neverland, he undergoes a journey of self-discovery, confronting his fears and rediscovering the joy of childhood. Meanwhile, Hook schemes to break Peter's spirit by turning his son, Jack, against him. Through trials and battles, Peter reclaims his identity as Peter Pan, leading the Lost Boys and facing off against Hook in a final showdown. Ultimately, Peter triumphs over Hook, reconciles with his children, and bids farewell to Neverland, choosing to prioritize his family over his past adventures. Embracing his newfound priorities, Peter returns home with a renewed perspective, ready to cherish every moment with his loved ones and leave behind the distractions of his former life. As Toodles, who, side character who's lost his marbles, gets his marbles back, flies off to Neverland, Peter acknowledges that the greatest adventure is the journey of life itself. So, jumping into message, Femi, what was maybe one or two messages that you took away from watching Hook again?
The primary message I think I took is being successful, being busy at work, having all the trappings of a life that people could say is well lived is not the same as valuing the relationships and the purpose and priorities that matter most in your
Mm-hmm.
life. A secondary one is sort of like don't forget the reason why you're doing the things you're doing. Don't forget the reason you're doing it. Don't just be doing it to do it. Don't forget the reason. And that is something I think all of us are continuously trying to find and look for and search for a purpose. And why are we here? What are we supposed to do? Some of us look so far at what we're trying to do that we forget the purpose of why we're trying to do it. And that is something that can confuse other messages and lead to a lot of debates. But I think that's one or two of the messages of the movie. Like, don't forget the purposes that are the most important as you're seeking, and make sure that the trappings and the other things of life don't make you don't let you forget why. Don't forget it,
Mm-hmm.
and don't let the other things and the things that seem like they're successful make you forget why.
Yeah.
How about
Awesome.
you?
No, I totally agree. Because I think the last time I saw this, I was in middle school or high school when my parents showed this to my brother and I. And rewatching it, I think I was really struck by the choice to have Peter Pan go back as an adult. And so for me, one of the things that I felt like a message that was coming through was being a quote unquote true adult does not require the complete sacrifice of the inner child. So I have some more questions. We're going to dive into that. But I think there's this tension that the movie gets at where you have the Lost Boys who are all kids, never grow up, and you have, you know, the kind of like Hook side where they're all stuffy and, you know, and Peter kind of becomes this merger of the two where he knows how to have fun, but he can dip back out of that and still take care of his responsibilities and be an adult and stuff like that. But thinking of those three messages that we brought up, so do you agree with them? Would you add any caveats, or what's your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think that to the one that you have, I 100% agree that you do not have to forget your inner child to be an adult. Um, the scene with Tinkerbell and Peter, when Tinkerbell, as a large version of herself, can kiss Peter, and he remembers that it's not just reverting all the way back to being Pan the Man, but
Mm-hmm.
he's like, "Oh, I'm here. I'm back because I'm supposed to save my kids." Like, it's this, don't forget it, but you still have these purposes, right? Like, you don't just chill at Peter Pan forever. You have to go,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, this is who I am at my core, and I have this purpose that I can't forget, and a wife that I can't cheat on."
Mm-hmm.
Like,
With the fairy,
with a
a
fairy.
giant fairy. Yeah.
And Tinkerbell is honest and like going, "Yeah, that's right. That's why you're here. It's you being a child would be good for my enjoyment and remembering
Mm-hmm.
the boy that I helped and was here with me for so many years. But that would be selfish of me knowing who you are now." And I think that was a really cool point. And then the not forgetting the wanting to go home for the kids,
Mm-hmm.
and remembering that after the defeat of Hook, there's still this sort of place he has to go back to and like rebuild now all of these
Mm-hmm.
structures, but with a clarity. I think those are two things I think. What about you?
Yeah, no, I really liked your example of not forgetting your why, because that was something that caught my attention, was how many times Peter actually starts kind of, he has like multiple missions, right? That all kind of flow on this weird timeline where he needs to get his childhood self back to have the imagination to beat Hook, but he can't go so far back that he loses his ability to be responsible. And there's these moments where he's really tempted to be all or nothing. You know, he's really tempted to just to stay, you know, oh, there's this pretty fairy lady, you know, or like, oh, there's all my buds and we're playing skateboard basketball, you know, in the woods, and it's cool. But it's that why that he's like, I'm here to save my kids. Or like, I thought it was really powerful that he has to think of a happy memory. Or he says it was, why did I choose to grow up? And he said, I wanted to be a father. And like that being kind of this thing that grounds him in like, wow, there was a reason to put all this behind me that was good and was healthy. So I would definitely agree with those. And so with that, let's jump into our audience and our rethink. All right, so Femi, thinking of our three usual categories of families with kids, friends, and evangelistically to spark conversations, where would you put this film? Like, which do you think, which of those three groups do you think best fits into this film?
Yeah, for other listeners, we usually joke around this section, but we'll just get into it. I think families with
Yeah.
kids, it's great. It captures the imagination, especially if your kids are familiar with the idea of who Peter Pan is from the old cartoons that have warnings now on Disney, or any of the new variations or renditions of this boy who is, fights pirates and lives in Neverland. To what he could become and how he could become. I'd pair this with a movie we'll hopefully do soon because I realized wanting to hold it off until some magnum opus is not realistic, but Lion King for kids is great. For friends, I think so. For friends who are around our age, it's really nostalgic. If you're a parent of a child who's never seen this, good luck finding it on DVD or streaming, but it's worth it, I think, as much as The Princess Bride is, to go back to. And if, again, you have those nostalgic friends who are willing to do like a regular movie night, which I encourage everyone who has the bandwidth and cost and responsibility and friends to host regular periodic movie nights to do so. It'd be a great to put in the rotation just for the conversations after, and for people to talk like pirates. It's really helpful. The reason why in those last two categories, I think nostalgia for the friends who feel that they sold out on life, who think that they're working just a job, and realizing that, no, I didn't sell out. I picked a purpose, or I'm trying to move towards a purpose, or to help to redefine, like, why am I working this job? And for the evangelistic piece, to remind people, just like Hook does to Jack, which we'll talk about, this idea of indoctrination, especially when indoctrination satisfies the ability to be angry at someone, right? Like, he's able to use that and misprioritize what Jack should be thinking about. Jack should be thinking about getting home too, but he's so angry at his dad that Hook's able to use that and sort of twist it for a while. To say that we are, as Christians, vulnerable to that is also important. But I'll pass it back to you, Josh. Like, what do you think about the categories and just how the Hook satisfies those things?
Yeah, I think I'll focus on the evangelistic piece because I agree with the family and the friends side. I think especially and we have a couple questions in the rethink geared towards this, but the concept of parenthood, relationships, adulthood is very, I feel like, loaded right now, which is really interesting because I don't feel like it, at least when I was growing up, I don't feel like my parents were arguing about growing up. Whereas now I see a lot of people where it's like, well, I can make a living doing this thing that's like kind of rooted in childhood things, or like, I don't have to have kids, or there's all these messages that, maybe knock up against things that the Bible would teach us about what it means to be responsible human beings, especially as we age and take on more responsibilities. And so I think this could be a movie that's really interesting to kind of talk about, like, the balance that maybe we've lost even in Christianity of like, no, you need to have like a real job and all these things, but also like you shouldn't just go trick off and, go crazy. And as Paul says, like, when you became a man, you put childish ways behind you. So there's a tension, but we also have to have childlike faith. So with that, in our first rethink question, and to kind of set the scene a little bit of how we handle rethink, usually what we do is we try to pick a scene, a quote, some element of the movie that stood out to us and kind of plumb the depths of that moment of how it maybe resonated with us deeper. So one of those scenes for me was when Peter and the small kids, or Peter first arrives and all the kids are kind of going to their sides about, who thinks this is really Peter Pan, and all the kids go to one side, and there's this one little boy who sits there, and he kind of like gets Peter to kneel down in front of him, and the kid just starts like smushing his face, and he's trying to make him look like a smile, and eventually he molds it just right, and he says, "Oh, there you are, Peter." And it's a cutely profound moment, and the child was looking for a sign that Peter was who he said he was. So the immediate next scene, though, is Hook experiencing an existential crisis and going through a suicidal cycle. And we know this is a cycle because of Smee's reaction. He's like, oh boy, here we go again. So, Femi, to you, what do you think is a theme or a message the film is drawing our attention to with the juxtaposition of these two scenes?
I don't know. I think that it was a really strong editing choice.
Mm-hmm.
But the joy of realization and the realization in a different way of, oh, this person might be gone, made me think of, as I was reading the question over, that for some people, that when they look at a person and this person they could have seen a long time ago or recently, they're thinking of, can I find the core of this person that I've known? Right. And if you were if you're that person and you're looking, right, what Captain Hook is struggling with is like, I know that is the person, but they're so different now. It feels like my relationship to them is broken, and that is breaking me. And so I think that as I was processing the question, reading it over before this, I was like, oh yeah, our relation to people is a huge factor in how we identify ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The boys knew Peter as a certain way, that he was locked in. And so when they were presented with him, they're like, no, I don't see him in here. I can look for him. Oh, there he is. Captain Hook was like, I know this is the right person. He doesn't look the same, but so much of my life is built up around that core piece of him. If he's not there, then who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What is my purpose? And in both situations, I think it teaches two lessons. One, remember the person, if you know who it is, remember the person who's before you. They're probably still the core person who you knew after some time. Be careful of trying to box them into what you think they should be. And at the same time, if somebody's really different from what you remember, being partially the same or not, if somebody's really different from what you remember, your identity is not built on their identity remaining the same. If their identity is shaping and morphing and changing, it doesn't mean your core has changed. It could mean that you're stuck in the past and you need to change something. But it could also mean that like you're trying to stay to a core while this person's moving on in a way that God or some other strain of desire has led them. And you have to really be satisfied and know who you are. A lot of fathers and leaders and coaches will say, you have to know who you are before you enter the field of relationship, because otherwise other people will change who you are and they will tell you who you are in relation to them. And they're allowed to change, but you're not, you know? So I think both of those together were really helpful for me to think through those aspects. But I don't know. I think in an editing choice, it was just a really good way to think of, here's the Lost Boys wrestling with this, and here's Hook wrestling with this. What were some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I like the idea of, reflecting on how our dynamic changes when someone else changes. Because I think there's something in us that doesn't want people to change, right? In a weird way, because, well, as long as I know that you stay the same, and if I like you or don't like you, I do like you, I want you to stay who you are, because we'll jive. But if I don't like you, stay who you are, because then I don't have to deal with you, and I can justify continuing not to deal with you. So I think that's really interesting. I think the thing that I was, I didn't know how to articulate it until just now, actually, was that you have Peter, who doesn't really know who he is, or he thinks he's one thing, but then these other kids are seeing something in him and they're trying to draw that out.
Yeah.
Then you have Hook, who he's like, wow. He's having an identity crisis, and his identity crisis is like, I'm out, right? In a really like dark scene in a way, he's like, oh, well, what's the point? But then you have Peter so you have these two reactions to an identity crisis. You have one is to be in the midst of relationship of people who are going to draw out who you are and try and like coax that out of you and remind you of some of those things. But then you also have Hook, who has to get basically saved from himself. And Smee kind of does that, but
The same thing. Yeah, they both do that.
yeah, but he doesn't really do it in a way that makes Hook a better person for it, or like draw out a healthy side of Hook. You know, like he's not saying like, oh well, Hook, like these are all the things that you do. He's just like, oh geez. You know, like,
and he calls him even to a worse behavior, right? I think what you made me think of is, from looking at it from Peter's perspective, these people are trying to help pull out the thing in me that I don't see in myself for the good, to help me save these kids, to help me go through this, as Tink said. Whereas Smee's like, let me just get this guy what he wants, right? Let me just get him to get his revenge and stay alive, because I'm really, living off of him, and him being the captain and me being the first mate, eating all this food. Being careful that you're not putting yourself in relationship with people who are trying to eat off you. Because if they're trying to eat off you, they're going to tell you what you want to hear so they can continue to eat off you. Right? And being careful that you're not doing that for someone else. Of, I want you to stay, so I'm going to tell you all the things that make you stay who you are. Always calling people to their highest self is a act of love, even if it hurts or makes it strained. Going, I see better or bigger or bolder in you. I see the goodness that God put in you. Which in this sort of way, the Lost Boys are trying to do for Peter, of like, you're better than just like an old fat grandpa man. That's what the kid says.
Yeah, definitely. Man, I want to stay on that for a second, but I think we will keep on moving. So to this idea of Smee calling Hook to a worse behavior, which I think is a great way to put it, he starts a class with Jack and Maggie, and it's called, and the first lesson is why parents hate their children, according to Captain Hook. And if we're honest as adults, listening to his spiel per se, he paints a very realistic picture of why parents could maybe do things for their kids. And the picture he paints is a very self-centered, they're annoying, shut them up, they need to go to bed so I can have 20 minutes peace kind of mentality. And then Hook says, before you were born, they were much happier, meaning, before you were born, your parents had all the time and all the energy, and, now you're a nuisance, you're a problem to them. What I thought was interesting is Maggie, the younger sister, does not buy it. So she's hearing what Hook is selling, and she's not about it. And so she's fighting back. Jack, however, does. So Jack does start to listen and hear, what Hook is saying. So why do you think that is, Femi?
I think that when it comes to emotions, people are much more present and in that moment than they can feel. And when Jack is thinking about what has recently just happened, his dad didn't come to a game. They flew across the ocean. He's staying in this house he doesn't know that is supposed to be when his dad was fun loving, but he doesn't know that. And his dad just yelled at all of them. Everybody just shush up. Like, these are things there's like, none of that feels like love. So when someone calls out the recent, you have this recency bias. I don't feel good now. I haven't felt good for the last 2 weeks. I haven't felt good for the last 3 weeks. I can only remember the negative of the last 3 weeks. I can't remember any of the positive of the last 3 weeks. You start in that emotional state, being able to buy what people are selling when it comes to things. As a father of toddlers, or older one will sometimes be like, you're so mean. I'm like, me? Being mean? Now, granted, I have been mean and I've had to apologize when I've been there, but I think it's easy for her in that moment when I'm not giving her a treat, or when I'm not letting her get her way, or I'm not doing exactly what she wants, for her to feel like, yeah, he tells me what to do, tells me where I can't go, tells me what time it is to eat. We have to go in the car when he says to go in the car, put on our shoes. Like, yeah, it's really easy to feel as a kid, man, all of this is not for me. Even as Christians, I think it's easy for us to be like, oh man, look at all of God's law. It's all for him and his glory. It's not for me. This isn't good for me. He doesn't love me. And for us to forget, no, this is part of life. And let me think about all the times he's been good to me. Let me remember all the times he's been there for me when I haven't deserved it. Those are harder to remember. And we're very, what have you done for me lately in our mindset? And I think children do that. And I think adults do that. adults are more sophisticated, quote unquote, on how they do it. But that's why I think Jack believes it. And Maggie remembers because of other things and probably her relationship with her mom and seeing what her dad can do. She just has a different priority and perspective of the exact same household, right? Of the exact same household. But she can remember because of what she chooses to look at. I can talk a little bit more about that, but why did you think Jack probably had an easier time believing what Hook was saying in that?
Yeah. I think accurate to what you were saying is that proximity to what he had just experienced. It was, we're coming days off of Peter missing Jack's big baseball game. And worse than not even going to the game, he sends an assistant to go record it. So it, again, sends this message of, well, you're just something to be observed. You're not really there to be celebrated. You're not there to have, for this to be for your own good and for us to like encourage you. You're in the way, which is just what Hook's message is, right? So I think one of the things that was running through my head is one of the Bible passages that we have listed in the theology section is about, Jesus saying you need to have a childlike faith. And I just thought that was really interesting that Maggie's a little bit younger than Jack, not by much, but just a little bit younger, and just the age difference there and the reaction difference. Because part of me wonders, okay, if I'm Maggie and I'm a little bit younger, yeah, like dad did these things or dad did this or mom did this, and it probably sits with you, but it isn't as, it maybe doesn't stick to you as much. Whereas if I'm imagining myself being Jack and having a memory like that, where I'm old enough where it sticks and it's in there, and it's like, you didn't do this, or he has the scene with him and Hook in the clock room, and he's like, this is for you, doing this, and he's like going down the list of all these things that Peter didn't do or said he was going to do. I think that just stood out to me of just like, not to say that we should play on the short-term memory of kids, but also I think there is a level of like I've wondered about, especially in like church and stuff like that, how we treat people in certain age groups as they get older. I feel like is really important, and so being cognizant of even ages, that slight variation in ages, where it's like, okay, these kids are starting to pay attention more, and they're gonna remember those hurts, and they're gonna maybe lock them in somewhere. So just to be mindful of that. But anything else you want to add onto that before we do our third question?
Well, the last thing you said about people in church, encouraging people to think and volunteer in a safe space, their good and bad, correct and incorrect thoughts in church, even though church has to fit into this time, this block, so the rest of our day isn't ruined. But giving people that space to talk about it in a class format and a discussion format, argue with each other in a way where no one's walking away feeling like an idiot, but they go, oh, okay, I'm learning, thinking differently, is so critical in figuring out how to make those spaces for the layperson, because of what you just said of, if they're only being told how to think and what is right, the danger is not that they will forget. The danger is that they will take away the feeling of, oh, I'm only being told, meaning I cannot think for myself. And people think that of Christians a lot, of not having critical thinking skills. If we let kids know, give me your thoughts, continue to think, let's work this out, let's continue to work this out, you might get Jack, instead of remembering how he feels, going like, really think about not just how you feel and all the things that remind you of how you feel. Think about all you know. Have you eaten? Do you have clothes? Did he have to pay for the trip? Could he have left you at home? Even this person who you don't really think likes you right now and thinks that you are in the way, like, let's think a little bit more, critically think, right? So that point that you brought up, I just wanted to say is, making sure we're helping people think, not just telling them what to think. So
no, I think that's great. So third question is similar to what I said during our audience section, and the message is, Peter has the moment where he's going through a cave and he's kind of remembering now why he's there, his why. And he says, I knew why I grew up. I wanted to be a father. So our current cultural climate of relationships, adulthood, parenting, if we're going to be honest, is a mess. There's so many messages and beliefs about what people should and shouldn't do with their time and their energy and their responsibilities, whether ones that they currently have or ones that they have and don't want to have anymore, stuff like that. So I think fatherhood is often spoken of as lacking in modern America. So for you, Femi, and especially as a not dad, asking a dad of two young kids, this is kind of a more, I was thinking of myself even as an audience person here asking this question. So how do we encourage men who are not yet fathers to soften their hearts towards that call, specifically because that is something like God desires of those who follow him?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope this answer comes off softly because I'm not telling people what to do. But as a believer, the interpretations in scripture around what is God calling you to do normatively, if it's not be celibate in ministry full time where you can't be divided, as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 7, it is probably get married, probably have kids to avoid trying to do anything, sexually immoral outside of marriage. And therefore, sort of like a part of obedience, right, is to pursue the growth of the family and the tutelage of children, whether by adoption, by birth, if possible. So, like, it's an obedience sort of thing. Some people are really driven by that. Of just like, sure, cool, whatever you say, I'll do it. Other people are like, yeah, but like there's costs and logistics and emotional health and all these other things. Like, why should I do that? What is the purpose behind it? And I think that gets into a purpose statement. And the purpose statement can't be what it currently is. If the purpose is just to be obedient, if it's just to be obedient in that aspect and not in the totality, in the holistic way, then you're doing it selfishly because you want to have the green check mark and you don't care about the souls that you bring in and what's going on in them and in their hearts and in their minds. So it can't just be a purpose thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a purpose thing about what you believe the obedience is for.
Mm-hmm.
And it is for your growth and for your sacrifice and for you not to get what you want. So you understand what God does in taking you in and saying, this life I give you is not so you can be happy. This life is so you can be better and I can love you into this thing. Meaning you sacrifice, just like you sacrifice for a wife, or you sacrifice for your friends, or you sacrifice for your family of origin, you sacrifice for your kids. You don't do something you want for your kids. And where Hook's thing sort of switches is it's not that parents are so upset sometimes about their kids because they exist. It's like, I was happier before this little person came around.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to give up that much of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to go to the gym, but you can't because you and your spouse have to figure out gym time. When you want to hang out with some girlfriends and you can't because your husband has to work late, so you got to stay home. You can't because your wife has to do something at the office and she has to stay late and you have to do something at home with the kids, or you're running from thing to thing to thing to make sure that they're going to have a good application for college while they're in high school, or they just are interested in something that you don't think is really helpful, like a 7-year-old actually interested in basket weaving.
Mm-hmm.
It feels just like such a sacrifice of your time, of your energy, of your prime, quote unquote, wealth building years. And to tell all people who are not dads why, one, working on themselves is really important, but two, why it's good to be a dad is it teaches you about sacrifice and purpose and clarity. And it makes you do the things that are hard and tough. Clean up that room again. You do their laundry again. You do their dishes again. You try to feed them again. And in so doing, you realize, as a Christian at least, like, man, God really does this for me again, and this for me again, and this for me again, and this for me. When you don't have that, if you are just trying to make yourself happy by having a kid, you put that burden emotionally on your wife or on the kid, even worse, to make you happy, to be the thing you dream of. And the best sort of like purpose quote of that I've heard is a father who adopted a kid that he's wanted for a long time, and the kid had all these developmental problems. And he said, when I was wanting to be a father, I wanted to play catch with my kid and do all these things with my kid. And I realized the way I could be the best father in the world for this kid is to make sure I take care of all these needs for him. And any parent of a child who has any type of developmental mental health physical disability, like those parents are having a hard time. They don't regret. Most of them don't regret having the kid. They're just like, I'm giving up a lot, and we need to celebrate that sacrifice, which is why we have Mother's Day and Father's Day. If they're doing the good job of sacrificing, they do need to be acknowledged. For some people, it's a lot harder than others. And for the people who are having it the hardest, we need to celebrate them the most because they're sticking in and not giving up. And for the people who are struggling with it in a point that it's hurting their children, they need more support. A lot of the time, they need to be able to ask for help and have people who are not so busy in their perfect life to give them help and support. And that builds community. It teaches kids about help and asking for help, capacity, encouragement, and hopefully could prevent if a lot of dads decided to sacrifice for a generation again, and not just do it because it was normative, but do it because they're like, yeah, I believe that purpose is worth it. We won't have a whole lot of rich people. We won't have a lot of successful people in some ways, but we'll have a whole generation of people who don't need the same mental and emotional regulation as an adult that they could have gotten when they were a kid and parents weren't racing for certain levels of achievement and trying to make their kids successful for college. And the competition that comes. I could get into a little more political way I would talk about that, but I won't.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean that you, as any person who's listening, need to have a kid or that God's even going to allow you to have a kid. But your heart being open to it is, I'm open to this sacrifice that would help me in my spiritual journey of understanding the importance of sacrifice as a boss, as a leader, as a spouse, as a boyfriend, girlfriend, as a child, even sacrificing for my parents. That's a good thing. That if everybody has that attitude, things are better versus people going, the people in my life are supposed to make my life look the way I want it to look. So I would encourage people in that as a overall positive, not a immediate positive, man, especially those sleepless nights. I can't tell you that's a good thing, like medically or otherwise, but I can tell you that knowing that that's something you're going to do and entering it boldly and saying, I'm going to stick with it when it's hard. Not a lot of people can do that. They force themselves to sometimes for this hope of a kid who's going to be a high school athlete. I know I'm sort of blabbering now, but like, there's no promise. There's no promise. Fatherhood and motherhood are not a joke, and therefore sex should not be joked with. And the challenges of that should not be joked with. But it is a high call if you take it, and it's a hard call. And some people want it because it's a high call and realize it's a hard call. Some people want it because they're ready for the challenge. Like, it's just, if you want a challenge as a young man who doesn't have kids, become a parent, and the other challenge in your life, you'll be able to see clearly now of what you want, what you don't, is what I think I can say.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
But that was a lot.
No, that's great. No, I obviously, like I prefaced, I am not in the fatherhood role, but Glory and I have joked that we feel like God has kind of maybe moved us from having that right now to be the quote unquote spiritual parents of 50 something, 100 something high school kids that we work with all the time. And I think obviously those are not the same thing, but I think if we have an attitude or a heart of even spiritual fatherhood or motherhood, I think that can be really powerful too, because yes, like I believe God definitely desires like a biological continuation of families, and he values families deeply. Like otherwise the Bible wouldn't be full of metaphors of adoption and, you know, calling sons and daughters. Like that wouldn't be there. But I also think that, like you said, in the complexity and the brokenness of our world, some people who desperately desire to have that progression of family can't, or there might be things in the way, or God might be calling them to a lifestyle of celibacy or something of that nature where I don't know how I'm going to be a father or a mother or whatever. And I think that would be my encouragement at speaking as a high school teacher, is that our God is so creative that the things he wants to flow out of you and that he asks to flow out of you can look so many different ways. The hard part, I think, which has been hard for me, is the discernment to know if it is God holding and protecting and keeping you for a specific kind of role, so maybe it's in the instance of someone who God is calling to be celibate. That might look like for you being a quote unquote father, to be a spiritual father, to be invested in the lives of young men or young women and helping them grow and mature in the faith. There might be people who are married and he's calling them to be supports, like you said, to some of those families who do have kids. And maybe that couple can't have their own kids, but they are free to be a support to other families. However, that same couple, if they're just not wanting to have kids because it's lame and we won't get to go to Cancun every year, that's where we start getting into the what's the heart behind why or why not? And I think that is the thing that ultimately God wants us to challenge in ourselves, is like when we think of the responsibilities that he will call us to, why or why not are we, why or why not? Why are we jumping into it? Why are we not jumping into it and pursuing it? So we'll close out with this final question. So we're going to get a little shout out to the late, great C.S. Lewis. But he has a quote. So when I was 10, this is Lewis speaking, when I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. So I had just kind of a general question at the end, Femi, of, connecting themes of the movie to this quote. But I actually want to ask this. How do you think we as men balance, because I've seen you do this to applaud you, and I will share this memory. So this is one of those things. I remember being at your house after we did the Signal and the Noise presentation at High Point. Shout out, videos are coming eventually. And I remember just messing around with your kids all day, like in the afternoon. Like we were doing this like absolutely ridiculous stuff at dinner with Asher, and they were just Deer was goofing around, and like it was just so much fun. And so there was a childishness that was in the air at the dinner table that was just like, like Colt and I were just like in hysterics, like laughing so hard because it was so goofy. But there's also a level where as adults, we can't be locked in that childishness, right? Like that would be immature, that would be juvenile, whatever words you want to throw in there. So what do you think it looks like for us as men, especially men of faith, to balance and to see that childlike nature that God calls us to have shine and come back in like the right context? Or like, what do you think it looks like to hold that intention to be men and to grow up and put away childish things, but also to, I don't know, kind of having them in our back pocket?
Yeah. I think I understand the question, and I don't have like a perfect answer. The thing that I'm thinking through for the education of my children and like the education of myself as well as an adult is there is a time for everything under the sun, to use Ecclesiastes language. There is a time to laugh and a time to cry. There's a time to, like, if you look at Ecclesiastes 3, there's this list, and that's where I'm getting all these from. But there is a time for things. There's a time to be playful and a time to be serious. And I think real mature men, a lot of men I know who have a lot of white hair, they know when it's time to joke around, and they can also drop the wisdom of generations on you. They have read the books. They have studied. They can be patient. They are gracious, but they can make a fart joke with the best of them, you know? And it's knowing when to do what. I think it's hard for people who are younger to really understand what is the right time to do the thing that I want to do, right? It's hard to know that you can't interrupt your parents until your parents teach you this is not a good time to interrupt me. I am ready and willing, and I want you to come to me, but that's not when I'm in the middle of a phone call with somebody who's grieving. Right? That is not the time. You need to look and assess the situation to figure out, is this the time that I can bring this thing to you and lay it here? Where God comes in is God is a father where we can lay everything at his feet all the time. But I think that because we are men and we are not God, we teach ourselves when is the right time for things, and we let other people know this is when we're available and this is the right time for things. And then we can be fully present. And that is the greatest gift we can give other people, I think, is to be fully present with them in the moment and for them to know that this is not the time is a way to respect them when they do have your time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a quick joke. Not a haha joke, but when I was a kid, I used to get mad at doctors for always being late. When I'd like show up and have to leave school and like why are doctors like how do they get to school on time? How do they get to med school and class on time? Like why are they always late?
C's get degrees, man.
Right at 10:15, right? Like what's going on? And credit to doctors, especially pediatricians and family medicine who have a bunch of appointments in the day. What they're really trying to do, I realize, is if I wanted them to rush me, then I want them to rush other people. But I didn't want them to rush me. I just wanted them to serve me. And I realized that, if I care about other people like I say I care, and I want my doctor to care about me like he cares about every patient or like she cares about every patient, then I need to be patient when the appointment time takes what it takes. Because something could be going on that's really serious and needs the doctor's care. And if I was going through that, I want them to take that care with me. And that might mean they're 5 to 10 minutes later than I want them to be. It also means they're probably staying back after to do all the notes a few hours after I've gone for all the patients they saw that day. And just like humble myself to that. Yeah. God is good that we can lay everything at his feet, but teaching kids like, hey, this is playtime. This is not playtime.
Yeah.
This is joke time. This is not joke time. This is listen time. This is tell time is a hard thing. So probably that's the best thing I can say is learning and teaching. There is a time for everything.
Yeah.
There is a time and to do things at the proper time.
Yeah.
Joking around the dinner table is great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think even to what you just said with kids needing to know the time when to do things, I think adults need that just as much. And I think
absolutely.
That's one of the things that, even to the themes of Hook and to the story Peter Pan in general is it's like, well, I don't want to grow up because growing up requires getting old, and getting old means I'm close to death. And it's kind of like, yeah, like, I don't know what you want. Like, you can't cheat the system. I'd have to reflect on this further before I get too like deep in sharing, but that's definitely been a big fear for me is I think, especially like being back in a high school, it's weird because I'm in the past, present, and future. I've told my coworkers this where I'm the present me, I'm just about to be 30 at the end of the summer. I can see the past me walking in the same, these same rooms, these same halls, talking and goofing around with my friends or whatever. But I'm also like having to grow up there, but as an adult now. And so there's this like very like very uncomfortable tension of what does it mean to be a child, to be goofy, to be, at prom, me and one of my coworkers, because it was May the 4th, we did a very terribly choreographed lightsaber fight in the middle of the dance floor at a certain point. I have to have a brain that's like, this is a dumb thing to do, and this will make the kids laugh, do it. But then there are other times where you have to sit and talk about some of the most serious things for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old to be thinking and feeling through. And, like that is a really hard. That is a really exhausting space to switch between. I'm realizing.
Yeah, there's some people who are really good at switching, compartmentalizing, other people who are not for that reason, and then we just push them to their gifts of, hey, this is your gift, do this because this is your gift. And you're really good here, and do more of this because of how much energy it takes to get from here to here to here to here to here. I think it's amazing to see people who can be serious for longer and people who can be playful for a lot longer. The people who are playful for a lot longer can be more successful as a Miss Rachel on YouTube for kids, as somebody who does songs and plays and the Wiggles and all that other stuff, right? And they can still be business people behind the scenes and people who are super, super serious, like all the time. And they can't stand anything being other than black, gray, and blue. Yeah, it's remembering those giftings is also like what you said is it's not easy for everyone. We should remember that. And we should also encourage people to their gifts if we see them so that they can operate where they feel the most as possible as they continue to grow up.
Yeah, that's great. All right, cool. So those were our 4 rethink questions. We're going to jump into our last section of the podcast, theology. All right, so with the Parable Arrows podcast, we always close out with theology because while we believe that engaging the stories of our culture is important, we want to make sure that we are filtering the things that we are absorbing in the media and the stories we consume through the scriptures. So we have a couple Bible verses that we're going to kind of point back to just reference what are some of the things that we are talking about. So one of the passages is Matthew 18, 1 through 5. So this is Jesus actually talking to disciples that unless you have a childlike faith, you won't be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. So to the tension of the film, it's a balance, and we can't be so serious that we focus on the rules and regulations and head knowledge of God. Like, we have to actually live it out and see the playfulness of his creation and his personality and stuff like that. And so remembering that the childlike nature is important. But in the next verse, 1 Corinthians 13, 11 through 12, Paul is talking about putting the childish ways behind us. And so even though, and we might think of this as a contradiction, but we can also see this as the question we just finished discussing of discernment of timing. What does this look like for us to be childlike in one area of our spirituality, but then men and adults and women and mature in another sense? So that's 1 Corinthians 13, 11 through 12. And lastly, this was another verse I found that was really interesting. This is Malachi 4, 6. So this is the prophet Malachi hearing from God about some impending things that might come that won't be so great. But at the end of this verse, it talks about God wanting to turn fathers to their sons and sons to their fathers so that things will be made whole and will be restored. And so thinking of, the idea that fatherhood and sonship are relational, and when those come together, they're powerful healers. So those are my verses. Femi, what were some verses that you thought of given this film?
Yeah. The one that I think this was from the second to last discussion question on the rethink, but why have kids? Children are a blessing from the Lord. And this is Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring reward from him. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Like the younger you have children, which, not everybody's emotionally mature to do that, but you have children. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. I think there's a lot of people who misinterpret this passage because some of the versions say blessing, some say heritage. Just it's a good thing, but it's not a trophy, right? Like I said, it's the ability to teach them and sacrifice influence to them in the world is a gift, and it's work for you. It's work for you. It's a gift, hopefully, to them, and a gift, hopefully, to other people who have to interact with them. But they're not a trophy to you, and how they turn out is not a reflection of you alone. What you do is a reflection. How you teach them, honor them is a reflection. But it's a heritage that you sort of like a home you take care of or not, in a way. You steward, and that's important. Kids are not a trophy. They're not to stack up. And they are not an arrow in your quiver just for you to use. They are things that you take care of. And we can get into why parable arrows also means you treat arrows gently and how you sharpen them and what you do with all of the pieces of an arrow, the shaft and the point, the fletching, and seeing somebody make a bow or an arrow is an artwork. It's not just so they can hurt people. So anyway, Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. This is the rehash of children, obey your parents in the Lord. It's the first commandment with a promise, but fathers, do not exasperate your children. And I think that Peter in the movie was exasperating his children at one point by continuously showing his family what the priority was. Not in a way maybe he was thinking. He might have just been thinking of the check they get. His family got his sort of seconds, not his firsts. And even as a father, in the way that I prioritize my time of when we're recording these and everything, I'm trying to make sure my family realizes they're not getting my seconds a lot, because I think that kids pick up on that, families pick up on that, etc. And then not exasperating your children, not making them upset or upsetting them on purpose. I don't mean if it's bedtime, it's bedtime. If they're mad, they're mad. But don't antagonize them in the way that you lead them. And I think all of us have potentially had bosses or leaders or people in authority over us who disregard who we are as people and the way they're leading us, and not just challenge us. There's some leaders who just challenge you in who you are, but who are really disrespectful sometimes. So, but yeah, those are the two that I picked for this one. Again, it's just a really beautiful movie. Steven Spielberg directed it. Every 5 seconds could be its own poster. Like you could just pause and it's great. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks for rocking with us. This has been our episode discussion on Hook. Some really quick updates for anyone who's been watching or listening to what we've been doing behind the scenes. So, one, we have some digital versions of our presentation that will be going up on our YouTube channel. So if you are not subscribed to that and you want to make sure you are in the know, be sure to do that. That will be the first place that they go. Second, I believe Mitchell's versus the Machines is our next episode, correct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Which also has some father stuff in it too.
Actually, I lied. July I have is Rollerball 1975, which I'm really excited for. So I'll have to get you a copy because just like Hook, it's very hard to find. But Rollerball from 1975, not the bummer remake. August is Mitchell versus the Machines. September is the wrestling film Iron Claw. And then October, we have the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So for a little Halloween flair. But thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. Be sure to send us any emails on suggestions, things that you're thinking about. And always remember, carry the conversation beyond just listening. Take it to your friends, your family, your churches, your small groups, your coworkers, all those folks. Get people chatting. And with that, we will catch you on the next episode. Peace out.
This episode was produced by Josh Erickson, Josh Cook, and Femi Shokoya, and edited by Josh Erickson. Our social media producer is Colton Mefford. We are currently self-supported. You can check out short stories, merch, and highlighted creators at parablearrows.com. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Parable Arrows or support us on Patreon. Thank you for listening to the Parable Arrows podcast. Think, move in faithfulness, and trust God. Pull back, aim high, let it fly.